So lesson number 3, monotasking equals doing more in less time. So if you're like me, and well, I mean, you can probably tell, but I like grew up in the 80s and 90s, and they're like, everything was like, I'm a great multitasker. And that was like the top of every resume. Oh, but I'm such a good multitasker. Well, you know, it's multitasking has kind of become a dirty word. And it's like, no, but can you single task, but can you monotask? And what struck me as difficult about that when I was working in my capacity at Dell and at Yelp, where my job was super broad, I was like, how can I possibly single task if my job is like, you know, 1,000 different things every day? But I think what we figured out is the answer to this is that you do multiple iterations of single tasking. So, so really focusing in on one task at a time increases the quality of the work that you do with that task, but doesn't necessarily preclude you from doing multiple tasks in a day, and shouldn't, is my, by the way, either. So the other thing that I really like about single tasking or monotasking is that it helps rebuild your focus. You know, if you're at the gym and you lift like all weight with your right arm, and then you like lift a weight with your left arm, and then you like go do a leg and another leg, and then like maybe a crunch, like you're not actually building the muscle. You're just like like you're just doing a distracted circuit essentially. So if you think about that, like in regard to how you approach tasks, if you single task, it helps rebuild your focus because you actually have to sit down and work through a complex problem and build that kind of like sense of focus again. And like, it's going to be tricky at first if you're not somebody who's used to single tasking, and it's going to feel really foreign, and it's almost a little bit uncomfortable because you're like, oh God, I actually have to sit here and figure this out. I can't just push it off into, you know, never land while I do something else that's distracting. But you'll, you know, find that your brain will fall in line quickly. I think also it helps you manage time better because you have a sense of how much time you're spending on each thing. It's not just like, oh, I don't know, I did maybe half of 14 tasks in the last 5 hours. And I also find that it really helps me improve just the quality of my output. And I guess it's not a surprise, that's pretty obvious, but for me, I've discovered that if I'm doing anything else, like even in average everyday life, for example, like I'm listening to a podcast, but I'm also like trying to get out the door to go, you know, do a bunch of errands. Like I will leave something at home, or I will forget to lock the door, or I won't know if I locked the door. And it's because my brain is occupied by something else. And so like, I'm not necessarily suggesting that you always have to single task everything in your life, but noticing like a marked decline in the quality of like my memory or my capacity for like conscious and thoughtful, you know, action has certainly really made me a devotee of single tasking. And not last, but also not least, you avoid switching costs. And switching costs is this interesting concept. It's essentially like kind of what you experience when you're like talking on the phone or responding to email, and you're probably not doing either very well. You can also see switching costs when you do your ABCs and 1, 2, 3s. By that I mean, I can say A, B, C, D, E, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 really easily, obviously, because like, you know, my brain's like letters and numbers. But if you start trying to do A1, B2, C3, like there ends up being a lag because your brain is like trying to switch back and forth. And so that mental lag creates like not only a time suck, but it also degrades your focus. And it's also why you're exhausted at the end of the day. Because if you're thinking, oh, I'm going to do PowerPoint, oh, I've got to go to Calendar, oh, I've got to go to Gmail, oh, like I need to have this phone call, then you're experiencing that mental lag in between, and you're asking your brain to essentially like run like zigzags. And it just like, if you feel exhausted at the end of the day, like maybe take a look at your switching costs, which is why monotasking will help. So we are going to talk about this technique. It's called the Pomodoro technique. Some of you guys may have used it in the past, and it is essentially a timer-based productivity single tasking technique. You are going to use a timer to break work down into intervals. It's typically 25 minutes of work with a 5-minute break. And this is how it goes. You take that to-do list that you totally optimized at the beginning of the day. You decide on the task, you set your timer, you work on the task, you end the work, and you take that break. And my preference is that you try to go screen-free for that 5 minutes, just to give your brain a break from being so stimulated. If you can't go screen-free, it's fine. But what happens is that for whatever reason, 25 minutes feels like something that, like an amount of time that you can actually take to the exclusion of all other distractions. So a phone call comes in, you don't take the phone call. Like a text comes in, you don't check the text. An email comes in, you don't check the email. You are doing the thing that you are doing for 25 minutes, and it's only 25 minutes. So at the end of that, you're like, all right, like I will go figure out who is trying to frantically get a hold of me with all of these digital pings. But what's really great about it is that you are giving yourself the opportunity to think deeply about that thing that you're doing, whatever it is. And, you know, I'm maybe making too much of it, because like, you can also do, say, for example, you could set your Pomodoro timer and do like, dig through my email, or you could do your Pomodoro timer and be like, do all my invoices. There's the opportunity within that 25 minutes to do something that isn't necessarily like a true single task, but it is a true single function. And this is why it works. It trains your brain to focus on one item for short periods of time. It allows for your brain to just chill for a second with 5 minutes. So you're not just constantly feeling like go, 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 hamster on the wheel. It sets expectations to the work and the time you'll need. So you can say like, oh, I know that like between, you know, 8 and 10, I'm gonna do like four Pomodoro like revolutions. And it also gives your brain the routine it craves. So your brain, as an OG lizard brain, is always looking for a way to latch onto a routine. And so Pomodoro can help that. So if we're like hearkening back to earlier when I'm saying like set the scene and like, you know, signal your brain and give it this sense of like, this is work time now, that this is exactly like how you can do that in a really easy way. Here are some apps that you can use: Be Focused, Focus Booster, and Tomato Timer. All of those are super easy plugins. You can also use your phone. There's tons of apps for it. And a lot of them will also integrate. So for example, there is a Pomodoro timer called Pomodone that will integrate with your Todoist. So you can put everything in your Todoist, start Pomodone, and then start digging through tasks.